Hi. Confessions of a Spanish Teacher, Part 9. Sorry, I think it's Part 8 actually. See, Confessions of a Spanish Teacher, Part 8. So, Chapter 10. A terrible event and how it all started. It was while I was working at this academy that I suffered another significant loss. One morning, I was on my morning break and the receptionist, Tony, told me that my brother Simon had rang. She had told him that I was in class and did he want to leave a message. He had declined and said he would call back later. I thought it was strange, but I didn't have time to call him back just then. Later that afternoon, he called again, and I was there. His exact words were, "Dad died this morning." I literally threw the telephone down and ran into an empty room screaming. I just could not compute what I was hearing. My dad, as do most dads, just always seemed so strong, so invincible. I couldn't believe he was gone. My mum had been in bad health for a while and was suffering from dementia. I knew that my dad was struggling caring for her. As I was in Spain, one very good thing that I do have are many lovely letters from my dad. I would not have had them otherwise. Although he was not a very emotionally demonstrative person, in his letters he had been able to be much more affectionate than he was in person. And my poor dad had gone to bed the night before and had simply not woken up. I could just imagine him not wanting to go and being lifted from his bed by some higher power. Time to rest now. My poor mum had found him, and the neighbours had found her wandering up and down the road looking for help. My dad was a very proud and independent man. He would not ask for help, and the stress of caring for my mum had ultimately proven to be too much. God bless my daddy. I went back to the UK for the funeral, and I went to see him in the chapel of rest. He did look peaceful. He looked so tiny though. After the funeral, I briefly considered staying in the UK to look after my mum, but it just wasn't possible. My son was only 2 years old at the time. Even that week I spent there looking after her was difficult. My mum died a few years later. One of my sisters, Susan, luckily was able to care for her. My mum was quite far gone with dementia by then. She had had a series of strokes. Her death was sad too, but it was almost a relief as she too now was at peace, and her and my dad were together again. They had been married over 50 years. Although it had not all been plain sailing, they had come through their problems. They had 5 children, 12 grandchildren, and several great-grandchildren. I came back to Spain and I would only see my mum one more time after that. So, I was working for a pittance at this school in Torrevieja, really struggling to make ends meet. A friend of mine, who I was later to enter another disastrous relationship with, I can really pick him. He told me of a job he had seen advertised in Via Martin Plaza. It was a holiday rental agency, and they were looking for someone who could speak English and Spanish. My Spanish was not perfect yet, but I could cope in most situations, so I went for an interview, and I got the job. I was so happy. It was much closer to where I lived. The hourly rate was more like €5 an hour than €2.50, and a full-time contract was included in the package. It all seemed great. During the 3 months I worked there, I discovered that in Spain, jobs that look promising are not always what they appear. Maybe it was a better wage than the academy and a full-time contract, but oh my gosh, they wanted blood. As I left the academy, my boss did warn me that employment in Spain was not always what it seemed. She also kindly told me that if it didn't work out, my job with her would be waiting for me. The rental agency was run by a bigger company, but the manager of my branch was a British woman who, to be frank, I discovered was pretty unhinged. I was on call practically 24 hours a day to meet people with keys or welcome packs. My official hours were 40, but I was basically working double that. I had to use my own car and petrol, and I never received any compensation for that. They kept promising it, but it never appeared. Then, after my 3-month contract finished, they did not renew it. I discovered that this is what they always did, to avoid ever having to give anyone an indefinite contract where you have so many more employment rights. Because in Spain, once you give someone a contract over a certain period of time, it becomes an indefinite contract. So I was without work with my son to support, and I just did not know what to do. I knew I could return to the academy, but the wages were so low I just couldn't make ends meet. At the time, a friend of mine was on holiday visiting me. Christine was a photographer who had recently decided to become self-employed, and it was working out for her. The story of what happened then is told in one of the blogs at the end of this book, so I won't repeat it here. Enough to say, I was terrified of being self-employed. No one at that point in my family had ever been self-employed. It was just so alien to my working class roots. I started teaching for myself. Twice I have left this employment and tried something else with disastrous results. These are the 2 experiences I'll relate now. So, chapter 11, on the radio. At first, my little school was doing so well, getting busier and busier. This was the boom of the early 2000s, and new people were coming to live here in Spain daily. This time, not only people retiring here, but families coming to give their children a better life. They were good times, but of course all booms bust in the end. And this was pre-Brexit, so there were no restrictions to people coming here to live like they are now. I was renting a locale, or they call it a locale in Spain. I can't remember the English word for it. Like not a warehouse, a locale. It's like an industrial unit, if you like, or renting a room almost. And it was costing me €800 a month to rent. I could not pay it anymore, so I moved my school to the basement of my home and started doing the classes there instead. Now, that locale, when I first started renting, it was only €300 a month, and every year it went up, and in the end it was €800. I just couldn't afford it. So when I bought my house, my property, I bought it because of the downstairs basement with a view to one day doing classes down here, which is what I do now. This was pre-Zoom days. Classes could only be done in person. It was okay. I was just about earning enough, but I had to let my receptionist, another teacher, go. One day I saw an advertisement for a salesperson for a local radio station. I applied, thinking I could fit that in with the classes I had. It was commission only, car and telephone supplied, and this suited me fine. I was the only person there who spoke Spanish, so I was able to deal with all their Spanish clients. I built up my client base and was soon earning very good commissions. There was so much bitchiness there, though. The sales manager seemed to hate everyone, including her own sister, who will also work there. She was one of these women, a bit like Holly Willoughby really, who appears all sweetness and light, but in fact is granite bitch. She created a nasty atmosphere at work of gossip and Chinese whispers. I cannot bear two-faced people. I prefer someone who openly does not like me than someone who pretends to but really doesn't. The day she told me about her sister having an abortion was the day I realised that if she was so nasty about her own sister, I basically had no chance. Also, I'd worked for myself long enough that I did not like being ordered around, especially by idiots. It worked well for a while as I was left to my own devices, because no one else could speak Spanish anyway. However, inevitably, an argument ensued, and I was asked to come in and talk about it. At that meeting, they confiscated my phone and my car keys, told me I was sacked, and drove me home. That awful sales manager tried to say that she was sorry, and it was all I could do not to tell her exactly what I thought of her. I had run down all my classes as I gradually was working more and more for the radio station, and I had to start all over again. This would not be the last time that I would have to do this. Difficult times. When I look back, a lot of my life in Spain has been difficult, mainly financially. It's so difficult to find regular, decently paid work, which is why so many people work for themselves and have their fingers in so many pies. I answered another advertisement for a salesperson, this time for a newspaper. My time in sales has made me so much more sympathetic to those who do this difficult job. You're normally on commission only, and you're often paying your own petrol and using your own car, computer, and telephone. So please be kind to anyone who tries to sell you advertising. Cold calling is part of the job, and it's so difficult. I hated it. However, I had to earn money somehow. I could not work in a bar or a restaurant, as my son was still young and I couldn't work evenings. I started doing some classes again and lurched along from week to week. One day, with the newspaper, we attended an exhibition, and that's where the next chapter of my story started. Chapter 12, One Car One. At the exhibition was a UK car hire company. Their purpose of advertising in Spain was that when people returned to the UK for holidays or to visit the family, they would often need to hire a car. Their base office was in Leeds, and they would come out not only to Spain but to other expat enclaves to promote their business. I got chatting to the guy there, Matthew, and he kindly took out some advertising in our newspaper. We were in touch, and as time went on, he asked me if I was interested in a full-time position as their representative in Spain. He had been thinking about taking someone on for a long time, but he had not met the right person till he met me. This was like a miracle to me. Of course I was interested. A regular income, a telephone, a car, a normal job. He invited me over to Leeds for an interview, and I borrowed the money to go over as I was absolutely living on the edge at the time. I started working for them, and I have to say that I loved that job. Talking to people, promotion, marketing is what I'm good at, just not cold calling. The job consisted of sponsorship, generally promoting the name of One Car One to the expat community. Once again, I stopped my Spanish classes as this was a full-time job and I could not do both. Sometimes I had to work weekends, etc., but I didn't really mind as it was a good job, and I was hoping to have time off over the following summer when everything goes so quiet in Spain anyway. That Christmas, I had my first paid time off since I had come to Spain 10 years before. One thing I remember especially vividly was a speech I had to make at an awards ceremony. I had to make the speech in both English and Spanish in front of over 500 people. I was terrified. As I spoke, my heart was hammering in my chest, and I had visions of having a heart attack and an ambulance having to be called. However, I did get through it, and I can honestly say I have never been scared of speaking in public since. The Spanish side of business improved, and bookings were up. I found us a new office. The previous one had been found by another contact and was not very good. I took on a part-time member of staff, and the training manager came over to train her. Then suddenly, one day, totally without warning, an email message came through the company system telling us that the company was going into administration and our salary that was due at the end of that month could not be guaranteed. What a bombshell. Okay, that's it for that chapter, or for that part, for part 8. I'll see you again in part 9. Thank you. May your God go with you. Dios.